You've seen the marketing videos, a sleek commercial drone zipping through a dense, foggy forest, sharply banking left to dodge a rogue branch without the pilot even touching the sticks. The promise is total, crash-proof autonomy. But out in the field, that promise gets complicated fast. What a manufacturer calls obstacle avoidance often translates to the drone simply throwing in the towel, slamming on the brakes, and aborting your mission halfway through. The truth is, drone navigation isn't running on one monolithic brain. The logic splits into two entirely different operational theaters, airspace and the ground. First, you have the high-altitude commercial airspace. Up there, the singular, overriding threat is manned aircraft. Then you have the low-altitude theater. This is where you're flying close to the Earth, navigating complex environments where the immediate threats are sudden terrain shifts and thick tree canopies. And here is the core dilemma. The algorithmic code required to survive ground obstacles actively contradicts the code required to share airspace safely. Understanding exactly how your drone processes these distinct threats is the difference between successfully completing a job and going home empty-handed. To see why these systems clash, we need to compare their overriding priorities. This matrix shows the two distinct environments. On the left, we map out the airspace variables regarding manned aircraft, and on the right, the ground variables for terrain and trees. The primary driver for anything happening on the left side of the board is absolute liability. You are operating under strict FAA compliance, where a single mistake results in a catastrophic collision. On the right side, the drivers shift entirely. Down by the trees, the goal is operational efficiency, making sure you capture the specific deliverables you were hired for, and keeping the physical drone intact. For the rest of this breakdown, we're going to trace the exact flowchart logic powering both of these systems to see what actually happens when a flight goes wrong. You simply cannot write a single algorithm that perfectly prioritizes both absolute airspace safety and uninterrupted mission continuity at the exact same time. Let's start with the logic pathway for aircraft collision avoidance mode. This is a highly restrictive, compliance-first system. This flowchart shows the simplified mission logic. Following the top row, the drone goes through its standard pre-check, moves to ready, and enters the arming sequence for a normal flight. But the critical divergence point happens right here. The moment the environment scan registers a manned aircraft in the vicinity, the normal mission ends. The algorithm issues an immediate, non-negotiable response. It bypasses all other logic, forces an automated landing, and triggers a complete disarm. The positive trade-off of this blunt logic is clear. It ensures absolute regulatory compliance and entirely prevents a mid-air collision. The severe negative trade-off is that this system guarantees a 100% mission failure rate the second it detects that specific threat. In the context of high-altitude commercial airspace, calling this avoidance is a bit of a misnomer. It is, strictly speaking, an automated grounding procedure. Now, let's drop down to low-altitude missions and look at the logic pathway for obstacle avoidance against terrain and trees. This flowchart illustrates the obstacle avoidance mode. Notice the divergence point when the system detects a significant ground hazard. Unlike aircraft detection, it doesn't immediately force a landing. Instead, this logic actively fights to bypass that sequence, calculating a completely new terrain-aware detour. This dynamic detour is designed to preserve mission continuity. It keeps your sensors active and your data collection moving forward, even in a cluttered environment. However, unpredictable dynamic pathing burns through your battery reserves much faster, and it drastically increases the risk of a secondary entanglement in complex brush. Returning to the first flowchart, there is a shared algorithm trait between the two modes. When handling non-critical, heavy traffic, both systems route into an extended operational loop. While taking an extended path safely delays the mission in a congested area, it forces operators to account for significantly larger battery margins just to stay aloft during the wait. If that detour or extended path cannot be safely resolved, both systems rely on a final failsafe protocol. They default to a complete abort and emergency landing sequence. So how do we map these two distinct navigation strategies against real-world operational environments? This chart breaks down the operational threat environment against the system's logic priority. The x-axis tracks the hazard from ground to airspace, and the y-axis tracks the priority from mission continuity up to absolute safety. The rigid aircraft collision logic sits squarely in the top right. It operates in a high airspace hazard environment with an extreme bias toward absolute safety over completing the job. The dynamic obstacle avoidance logic lands in the bottom left. It manages high ground hazards with a clear bias toward keeping the mission moving forward. There is no single best avoidance system. There is only the correct algorithmic tool for a specific altitude and threat profile. For commercial and enterprise operators handling urban deliveries or high-altitude mapping, the recommendation is straightforward. If you are sharing airspace with manned vehicles, you must rely on aircraft collision avoidance. You have to culturally accept that liability protection means dealing with frequent, sometimes frustrating mission aborts. On the other hand, if you are an inspection or cinematography operator working under a dense, complex canopy, your mandate looks different. Terrain avoidance logic is your primary tool to keep the camera moving. Because of unpredictable automated rerouting, you must maintain immense oversight of your battery reserves. True operational autonomy isn't about buying a drone that never crashes. It is about completely understanding how your drone's internal logic decides whether to fight for a mission or abandon it entirely.